Whether you consider yourself a writer or not, you've been asked to write before. This could be an essay for school, an email at work, or a caption for a post. Sometimes when we're writing, we have a complete brain fart. No matter how hard we try, the words aren't coming out. We write a sentence and delete it. We start writing another sentence, get halfway through that, and give up entirely. Then other times, we sit down to write and the words effortlessly flow onto the page. Your thoughts are coming together nicely, and you feel so focused. You may have heard this term before, but psychologists call this flow state. Signs of a flow state include focus, enjoyment, and persistence. You can be in flow while playing sports, reading, gardening, and many other activities. Flow can be extremely useful whenever it comes to work, though. It can help you accomplish a challenging task, accelerate learning of a topic, or experience fewer distractions throughout the day. All of these characteristics are important whenever it comes to being a high performer. But is there a way to put ourselves into flow state rather than just relying on the in-the-moment energy? Luckily, there is, and my friend Justine Elizabeth is here to share how we can do that. Justine is a flow coach who makes flow trainable so that you can reach new heights without being burnt out. I'll have to be honest, I was a little skeptical about flow at first. Of course, I've experienced flow states in the past, but I wasn't sure if it was truly trainable. But as someone who's always looking to step up my performance both with work and my hobbies, I had to dive in and learn more about it. I should have never doubted her, but I was pleasantly surprised with what I learned from Justine. And I've already implemented her tips to enter flow state whenever I know I have an important task to finish. Justine is a student of this craft, and I think she is the perfect teacher to introduce us to the power of flow. So if you want to learn about flow, let's get into it. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the snowboarder, the yogi, and the world traveler, Justine Elizabeth. You know those moments where you think, I wish I would have learned this in school? Those are the topics that we love to talk about. Join me each week as I interview experts sharing their strategies for solving problems that us young adults will face throughout our 20s and 30s. So what are you waiting for? If you want new episodes about adulting advice every Monday, hit that follow button. You've mentioned the word a couple of times, flow. Let's give some definition to that word. So could you describe exactly what you mean whenever you're talking about flow?
Flow is a very intangible state of mind and being, and historically it's been pretty hard to define. A lot of people have come up with different ways of defining it, but because it's such a personal and subjective experience, it's hard to kind of pinpoint. But the researcher, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who actually laid out the parameters of flow states and how we get there, he was probably the closest in really defining it, but even his definition is really just a bunch of parameters. So kind of how I like to explain it to people is it is the state of mind and being where humans are both performing at our best and experiencing the most out of life. It's this overlap. You know, we have peak experience and we have peak performance, but you can have those and not have overlap. You know, you may be performing at your peak, but be emotionally exhausted and emotionally burnt out, and vice versa. You might have a peak experience on a mind-altering substance or in a spiritual state of mind, but you might not necessarily be performing a skill at the same time. And flow state is kind of where those two things marry and overlap.
Can you give an example? I know you talked a lot about extreme sport athletes and them being a lot of the genesis of flow and just positive psychology in general too. Can you share like an example that some people might know of somebody that potentially was going through flow?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think of like Olympic athletes who are winning the gold medal and coming out of it and saying they were in the zone, that is really a correlation with flow state. It's a common way that people will describe being in flow. A lot of, like you said, extreme athletes who kind of set the ground for peak performance were really experiencing flow states. One of the top that comes to mind for me is when you think of rock climber Alex Honnold. You know, he's become very famous in the last several years for free soloing El Capitan in Yosemite and really, truly setting the bar for what rock climbing is as a sport and definitely when you look at Alex Honnold, when he is up there free soloing with no equipment and he is just like one with the mountain, he is in a flow state.
Ugh, man, don't get me started on that, man. He is something else. But you're right. Now that you gave me that example, that is like the definition of somebody in flow. But you don't have to be like an extreme athlete to experience flow too. Can you talk about the first time that you actually experienced flow?
Yeah, you don't have to be an extreme athlete. You can be anyone. And most likely, you already have experienced a flow state no matter who you are. My first experience in flow was probably when I was 16 and I was a pizza restaurant worker. And my job was I was a cashier, but it was a little bit more than that. I was also kind of responsible for the whole flow of the restaurant where I was taking pizzas out of the oven, cutting them, answering the phone, directing the pizzas, whether they're going to delivery or the pickup orders. It was just kind of a lot of juggling different responsibilities. And on slow days, not much going on. I would get really bored. It was pretty straightforward. But there was one thing I really started to notice when I look back now, understanding what flow state is. My favorite shifts in that pizza restaurant were always the Friday and Saturday night evening shifts. And that's because if you've worked in any restaurant, that is when you're getting the rush, right? That is when you have this flood of people coming in. It's like the highest time, the peak time of the day where people are coming in and ordering. And naturally, the demand is higher. I'm working harder. And I just noticed after a few of those weekends where I had really kind of got the whole basics down and I knew what I was doing and I was feeling confident at work, I noticed that rush was my favorite shift to work because time would just fly by and I just felt so fluid. I would be like taking the order on the phone while I'm cutting the pizza. Like I just almost like it was moving through me. And I felt like I was never making a mistake. I was just so in tune with everything that was happening all at once. And I would look up and suddenly it was time to clock out. And I just loved those shifts because not only was it going by faster and like you want to go home from work, but I was also having a lot of fun. And it was like weird to say that like, oh, I'm having so much fun sitting here cutting this pizza. But I just naturally was really feeling like I was having fun in that moment. And I didn't know what to call it back then. But once I started learning about flow state, I was like, oh, light bulb. That was a flow state. That was probably my first experience of what flow was. And I wish I had known back then that I could train myself to experience that, not just spontaneously, but I could bring kind of the elements of what I needed and create that for myself in the slow shifts also if I needed to.
Listening to you talk about that immediately brought memories of whenever I was working at McDonald's when I was a teenager too. And I remember the exact same feeling and experience. And it would be the lunch rush or the dinner rush. Although I didn't want that all of the time, I really, really enjoyed those periods because just like you, I felt like I was in flow. I was doing probably 3 to 5x the productivity, the jobs that I would normally do. I felt like I was really hitting my rhythm all the time. And it'd be like, 10:30, 11 o'clock when we start. And then I would like look up and see what time it was. And it'd be like 2 p.m. And I was like, whoa, where did the last 3 hours go? And that experience and that feeling was so gratifying in a certain way. But as I was mentioning, I did need periods of like rest and recovery. I wasn't surprised whenever you're talking about flow cycle, these 4 different periods, that recovery is a big part in it. It's one of those. Like you can't just be in the lunch rush feeling all times in life, correct?
Correct. Absolutely. All stages of the flow cycle are very essential. And those stages, just to recap, would be, the struggle phase where obviously you're learning a new skill. Like I said, you're kind of learning the basics. You might not really be confident in what you're doing yet. And so you can't really find flow yet. But then there's that breakthrough point, that release, where you finally feel that confidence and you know what you're doing and you've got it down. That leads the way where you can actually find flow. That's that peak performance experience that we've got. And then we need the recovery phase. And they're all essential, but when I have to look through the cycle and look through patterns of what I see with clients and with friends and other people who are high performers, I would say recovery is one that gets so often overlooked. And for that reason, I say it's maybe the most important in today's society to kind of instill in people, because we can't sufficiently, sustain a flow state or any type of peak state forever. We have to have that recovery period in order to let our bodies not only recover, but our minds as well. Because when we're in those peak states, we are operating with such an intense level of focus as well as physical skill. So we're not only using physical resources, but we're also using a lot of mental and energetic resources. So having that recovery period is really crucial.
I heard you briefly talk about how travel impacted how you viewed work and kind of led you to flow. Does this go a little bit hand in hand with what you're just now talking about with recovery?
I'll give you the backstory there. So
Please, because you're a world traveler. You talk about eating the world with eyes. Girl, set the stage. You are not just going over to London and hanging out for a semester. You've been around.
I had the privilege of being a digital nomad for several years. So for about 7 years, I was nomadic and didn't have a home base, or actually wasn't paying rent is how I say it. Because I would still say I had home bases in a lot of different little nooks and crannies around the world, but I was mostly traveling. And this is really what led me to learning about flow states, was this journey while I was on the road and out there in the world. I never really knew always what was coming next, right? I was actually traveling in itself was kind of a flow state for me, where I just kind of followed my intuition and would just kind of follow what I would call the universe's signs and things like that. But really what I realized I was looking for was this underlying thing that I didn't have a name for, but I would find myself being like, okay, for example, I'm going to go travel. I'm learning all about yoga teaching, and I became a yoga teacher. And I really just immersed myself in this world and learned everything I could. And then once I was done learning, I was like, all right, what's next? And then I'm going to go learn rock climbing in Laos. And I left Bali. I went to Laos and I spent a month in Laos learning how to rock climb and lead climb outdoors, and just really throwing myself, kind of like I said, trial by fire into these things. And I loved each and every one of them, but I would come out the same every time. I would be like, that was a part of it, but not all of what I'm looking for. And I think I was really looking for this purpose of what I wanted to share with the world, or something like that. I was looking for this meaning, this intangible thing. And on this journey, I was also exploring the hula hooping and my circus arts and things like that. And it was all kind of weaving in, where it was all part of it, but not the whole thing. And finally, I actually met someone who recommended I read this book called Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And I read the book and I was like, this is it. This is the thing I've been looking for. It was in every single one of these environments that I immersed myself in, and these activities that I really loved doing and felt gave my life this really rich meaning. But it explained why each one only felt like a piece of the puzzle, because flow state was the thing I was really looking for in all of those activities. And then once I had read that book, I was kind of dead set. I got to learn more about what the science is behind this, what's really happening in this state, because I want to help other people get to this state. And I was also, like I said, working as I was a nomad at the time. I was doing digital marketing online, and I was kind of straddling these two very different worlds, this very corporate, marketing world, and also this very free spirit, travel everywhere world. And I just started noticing that as I was learning more about flow states and learning more about mind-body stuff through the yoga, through the climbing, through the hula hooping and the circus, I was feeling this was translating in this almost subconscious way in my work. And I saw a lot of this need in my coworkers, in the industry itself, and just in people back home also, where I was like, man, this stuff that I'm learning could be so beneficial if we apply it in these spaces. It's not just for the hippies and the free spirits, the nomads. It can be so helpful for the householders and people at work. And, it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both, So I kind of then made it my mission, to really try and bring this back home and bring it into the workplace. And now that's kind of why the Flow Codes was born.
That's such a cool story. And you've lived so many amazing experiences already in your life. Really excited to see what you continue to do with your life. But let's keep going down this thread that you opened up, which is essentially why the listener should care today. What are the benefits of flow, and how can I use flow states to accelerate my financial and work goals?
Yes. Well, flow state has amazing benefits for mind, body, spirit. Like I said, it's this marrying of where you're at your peak performance and you're at your peak experience. So naturally, we can imagine that those both have a lot of benefits built in. When we're talking about peak performance, especially at work, you're talking about being more productive, being a more valuable employee, or if you're a business owner, being able to expedite a lot of your tasks in your day. Imagine if you have this week's worth of tasks, being able to accomplish them all on Monday. So it's kind of this benefit of time as well. And then as well as the peak experience part of it, as we were talking about in both of our stories in the fast food industries and the restaurant industries, who doesn't want to be happier and be more present and feel more alive? That richness that we all crave in life, I feel, especially in the corporate society that we've kind of created in the United States, at least today, we put a lot of emphasis on producing without a lot of the well-being, balancing it out. And for me, I see flow as this opportunity where we can achieve both, where we have this kind of golden opportunity to meet the needs of both the self and the system almost, because it's unrealistic to think either one can win it all. Like, we can't be machine workers. We're humans. We absolutely need the recovery, and we need fun, and we need to experience life and not just be working all the time. But a lot of us, especially high-performing people, we have really big aspirations and really big goals, and we crave working hard sometimes. And a lot of our time, actually, we can crave working hard and reaching those goals. That can be very fulfilling and satisfying as well. So it's kind of like, how do we bring a balance to both? How do we meet both needs? And for me, I see flow state as kind of an opportunity to be one of those answers that we can use.
I'm bought in. I see it being beneficial in many areas whenever it comes to work, especially just like hard task that we've all experienced it, that you get that white sheet of paper and you have to start working on a new presentation, or you need to build this report, or you need to start systemizing a process. And that overwhelming kind of first initiative or step, like, it can be challenging, but training yourself to begin to get into flow state prior to doing some of this really deep work that requires a lot of concentration could be beneficial for A, to move that project along, but to B, like, find enjoyment in that process too. Because I know many of times where I've just been like stuck. Like, let's talk about like this podcast, for example. After this is done, I need a script and write an intro for the episode. And it takes me forever until I get that first like little bit of movement, and then it just flows out. Then all of a sudden I'm just like, and I'll stop everything at a specific time, because I'm like, I know if I just concentrate for the next 15 minutes, this will be done. And I'm feeling it right now. Like, I'm feeling like I'm moving towards that flow state. Let's talk about like how we can actually channel some of this and be intentional, like intentionally get our body into flow state. You talked both about flow aids and ailments. Maybe we could talk a little bit about both in context of like what can help us and what can hurt us in terms of getting towards flow state.
Yeah, definitely. The aids are naturally things that are going to help us get into flow state, while the ailments are things that are going to kind of prevent or block us. And there are many different types of aids and ailments. I kind of like to break them down into environmental, mental, emotional, physical, and then energetic. So you can have an aid or an ailment in any one of those kind of categories. So to make this really easily digestible, I can use environment as an example. When you're at work, like you're saying in a podcast environment, for example, and this is very also, I would preface this by saying this is very unique to each individual as well. So this example may not be applicable to anyone listening, or it might hit the nail on the head, or you could be anywhere in between those two things, because how you find flow is going to be very unique and different to how I find flow or to how any listener would find flow. In the example of the environment, I am someone who, when I'm experiencing that block, like you described, that like initial hesitation where I just can't get over that hump and I can't break through yet, especially if it's something that I'm having to come up with words or mentally write something out, I really am very distracted when there's anybody nearby in my environment. If someone's like looking over my shoulder or if there's noise happening, I just am so distracted, I can't break through. So for me, I have to kind of make sure that I'm in an environment where I can close the door, kind of put my headphones on, be in silence, and tap into that just listening to myself. If someone jumps into the room and they're like kind of looking over my shoulder, I'm suddenly totally jarred out of the experience. So I am really trying to be proactive when I know I've got this task and I've got to tap into that flow state. I'm going to really try and set up my environment so that I'm in the most conducive place as possible for me to reach that. So that means, for me, that means like if I'm with my roommates, if someone's home, that means I'm explaining to them, hey, I've got this task I'm working on. I'm going to put a little do not disturb sign on the door. Please let me be in my space undisturbed for the next like 30 minutes, however long I need. But on the other hand, some people really perform well with an audience. And this can also vary based on, what you're doing as well. So for me, in this example of like writing and work, I need that silence and that space. But when I'm hula hooping or when I'm doing yoga, I actually love having an audience and I really can tap into the flow state with an audience there. So it varies based on your activity and based on the person as well. So that is kind of an introduction to the flow aids and ailments. But like I said, you can have way more than just environmental aids and ailments. You can also think about things like just your own energy that you're coming into the activity with. If you're really tired, if you lost sleep from the night before, you've already got kind of this physical ailment that you're working with. And maybe that needs to be addressed before taking this task on. Is really about identifying the energy levels that are in your body, as well as your own emotional and mental frame of mind that you're kind of walking into this activity with. And if you're recognizing, I'm not in the best physical or mental or energetic state right now, it's a matter of asking yourself, is this an activity that needs to get done right now? Would I be better suited when I've gotten more rest? Or if not, how can I move the needle just a couple degrees closer to a state of mind that would be helpful for me to tap into this a little bit better?
What I love about the aids and ailments aspect of this is not the fact that like you're going to give me the silver bullets and be like, do these 12 things in this order, and that's going to move you into flow state. As you mentioned, it's so personal, and there's probably hundreds of factors or potential things that anybody can pick and pull from to help aid them or potentially prevent them from getting into flow state. But giving it some definition and knowing these things, you can now start to pay attention. And over the next couple of weeks, you can realize some of the things that do help and hurt you. And you can make note of those. And you could either organize your day so that I'm usually in flow state here because my energy is at the best peak here. People leave to go to work, so the house is quiet. All these different things that you're like, cool, I'm going to put my flow state projects in kind of this bucket. But like personally me, so a couple of things that like really progress me towards flow state. I love to like clean up, tidy up. Like if I go ahead and like clean up a room, all of a sudden there's just like this anxiety that gets lifted and this concentration that starts to take hold of me. And I'm like, great. So like I tee myself up a lot. I do most of my heavy project work, like my most important project. Usually I do it at 9 a.m. in the morning. And right before that, I clean up my house. I tidy up my house like 10 minutes. I go and I pour myself a hot cup of coffee, and then I sit down here, and then I'm usually ready by that time, 10, 15-minute ramp up that like, all right, I'm ready. Let's open up this project and let's do it.
Yes, that makes total sense because not only are you actually impacting your own environment, if you're someone who, like me, if I see clutter around, I'm distracted. It's like visual distraction for me. Not everyone is like that. So it's not like that is the case for everybody or that everyone has to always be in a perfect, tidy environment to get anything done. But for me, that is the case. So that makes sense if you're someone who visually you like that kind of consistency and not have a lot of clutter in your visual space. It makes sense that cleaning would help you kind of get into that state. But also because cleaning in itself can kind of hit those parameters of meeting a flow state. You kind of have this expectation, you know what needs to be done, you know what success looks like. And by accomplishing these few tasks that are easy wins and then jumping into kind of the bigger task, you've kind of already set yourself up to where you're already almost slipping into that preliminary beginning stage of a flow state.
Do you put something like a task like that might not be like that you can easily accomplish that kind of helps you begin to progress into flow state? Like, is that a tip or a hack that they talk about pretty frequently?
Yeah, it is a strategy you can use and experiment with. I don't always necessarily do that, but I am always, like we've talked about, really being mindful of the space that I'm creating when I have a big task like that. Really, when I use that strategy for myself, I have experimented with it at the beginning when I'm getting into a flow state, but what I'll really use that for, this is like my secret sauce, is when I am struggling, when I'm really struggling in a task. I've already started the task. Like, for example, let's say I'm hula hooping and I'm really trying to learn a new trick and it's just not clicking. I'm not getting there. I'm not reaching the point that I know I need to reach. I kind of take that moment of pause, and that's when I will implement that strategy. And I will kind of go back to, all right, here are some tricks that I've mastered and that I'm just going to like free flow for a minute with things that I know I have already kind of got embedded in my mind and body, and just kind of break through into that state to kind of trigger that already. And then I'll try the trick again, try the trick I'm trying to learn again. That way I've kind of allowed myself to already slip into a flow state and then apply the new part that was kind of part of the struggle phase before.
Bullet out like a few more things that you've seen as like popular flow aids with some of your clients and some of the work that you've done.
Probably one of my favorite ones to recommend people is, well, we'll talk about brainwaves. This might open up a whole other Pandora's box.
Yes. Let's go.
So I'm not sponsored. This is not like a paid sponsor or anything like that, but I really just love this website. It's called brain.fm, and I talk about it in the course. And this is a really great aid that I use a lot of the times. This is kind of like the neuroscience hack almost. Part of the flow cycle is each part of the cycle, we are kind of going through different brain wave state. They've measured this out on, EEG graphs and been able to see what's actually happening in the brain when we're going through each phase of the cycle. And one of the key takeaways was when we're in the flow state, we are reaching this theta brainwave state, which you may have heard of before because we talk a lot about theta in neuroscience when it comes to like these deep states of healing or meditation. And normally those are the only times we really see theta wavelengths being popular, is when we're in those deep meditation states or in a very specific stage of the sleep cycle. We're not typically reaching theta when we're awake and conscious. And that is really what's key, is when we're in flow, we are awake and we're conscious and we're in this like conscious control of our body, but we're also reaching that theta wavelength state. It can be really beneficial in that way as well. But kind of the neuroscience hack around to reaching flow state is we can induce a theta wavelength state by listening to certain frequencies of music. And brain.fm is one way that we can kind of experiment with that. So I definitely recommend people, there is a free trial of Brain FM to experiment with that and see if it kind of impacts your work at all. I'm not sure if you got a chance to use it at all, or
I did.
I'm not sure what your takeaway was from it, but for me, the Brain FM focus, they have like a few different settings. The focus setting for me kind of helps me. I can almost feel it in my brain and in my body. I can feel like the click almost after a couple minutes of listening. I can feel myself slip into a really focused state of mind. And I recognize, okay, I'm moving from this like active waking beta wavelength state where I'm really aware and alert of everything to a more focused, calm theta wavelength state.
Yeah, I used it on Sunday. I was just curious and I was starting my projects late Sunday morning and I put on brain.fm and picked a category and I found it very, very helpful. Honestly, I forgot about it after about 3 to 5 minutes. I mean, if I usually listen to my TV on about 15, I turned it down to about 5. So it was much softer than usual. And I was kind of like noticing the music in the background while I was starting to get into some work. And then as I mentioned, about 5 minutes into it, I kind of forgot. And I was like, I like put a timer on too, because I thought that might happen. I was like, how long until I kind of completely forget about the rest of my environment and I'm just like locked into my work? And I thought about that thought about 25 minutes back in. I like looked at my timer. I was like, whoa, 20 minutes went by. I wasn't really thinking about it. I finally caught myself in that whole like, yep, Justin, you're now consciously aware that you like were intentionally trying to induce a little bit of a flow state. So I found it really helpful and beneficial. And if it's not brain.fm, I mean, you give a lot of the BPMs on, the different states and what certain songs or rhythms of songs would be good for inducing different states of flow. And you can go, like YouTube has a plethora of those playlists already built for you too. So after I was on brain.fm, I just hopped over to YouTube too, and I found like a good 2-hour playlist that was like supposed to be in the same BPM range. And I was just like, sweet. And I put that on and I did work all Sunday morning.
Yeah, exactly. That to me is like one of my favorite hacks. And this might be like a very auditory part of our beings, because you and I have both mentioned we are really auditory learners. So because we're so susceptible to the auditory aspect of life in general, that might be really beneficial for anyone else who's listening who's an auditory learner. But yeah, that is one of my personal favorite aids that I use, especially when I'm in like any type of workflow, when I need to write or when I need to brainstorm or concentrate in that type of way. Brain FM or a YouTube playlist like that with the specific beats per minute is something that I'm almost automatically using every time.
It's so good. So Justine, as we're closing up this conversation, I do want to bring up a topic that I feel like probably comes up pretty routinely on this podcast. I don't know if it's just the date that I'm kind of headed towards or something I'm just becoming more aware of, but I really want to differentiate between a productive flow state and an unhealthy overwork, especially in American culture. And I know you know this because you've seen and experienced so many other cultures. We're super susceptible of this. You talk a lot about wellness and balance. I'm really curious to just open up a conversation and get some of your thoughts on like, how do we, use flow state in a productive way versus using it to just unhealthily overwork?
Yeah, I think the key for me is really asking yourself how you feel after an activity or after any period of time where you're really concentrating or really applying yourself. Kind of how we mentioned before, when I was straddling these worlds between like corporate and the travel, the free-spirited, the freedom, all of that, that's when I really started to notice this like discrepancy and just how tapped out most of us are when we're at work. We're expected to be performing at peak all the time. And if you're a high performer, especially when you feel like it's rewarding to work hard and, you want to give your best just naturally, that's how a lot of us are built, naturally inclined to want to give our best, especially if we care about our jobs, So for me, the key in using these dates productively and not burning out is kind of checking in with ourselves afterwards and seeing how we feel. Because when we're operating in that like kind of burnout cycle and we're not using these mindfully and not kind of balancing out that well-being, when we end our peak productivity period, we're going to come out of it and feel exhausted and we're going to feel like we need a break. We're emotionally going to be drained, physically may even feel like we need to rest, like take a sleep, take a nap. But when we're coming out of a flow state, we could still be exerting a really high, intense amount of energy. But the difference is when we come out of it, we're going to actually feel the opposite. We're going to feel energized. We actually feel like we may not be ready to sustain a flow state again, but we'll be like, dang, that was awesome. I can't wait until that happens again. We're going to be feeling really on this almost high. And I think that for me is one of the key indicators of when we're using it in a healthy way and when we're using it in an unhealthy way. That listening to your body and kind of picking up on those cues of, am I feeling really down and exhausted and like I just got to stop and shut the world out? That is not a productive feeling for anyone. But the opposite is really rewarding and really productive.
Yeah, I think it can be hard to catch in the moment, but I do think there have been periods that I probably have overworked myself and I really did need to take a break. But then there have been other periods where might have been working the same amount. Like on paper, it might look like I'm quote, quote, overworking, but I'm like in such good flow state and I'm like loving everything that like I'm still grasping for the challenge ahead. And like, I just like want to rest and recover so that I can
Do it
go back
again.
into the cycle again. Yeah. Yeah. I remember like, especially like this happens all the time. Anytime I'm like, I kind of finally break through the struggle stage and kind of into the release stage of skill building. Like I remember breaking through with rock climbing and breaking through with longboarding and things like that. And like now you're finally in a period where like it just feels so good to do that. And it's same with work. Like whenever I started my business and I was like learning things like all of the time, like I was exhausted and tired, but like I woke up and jumped out of bed the next morning because I was kind of ready to get going and do it again. And once again, I was probably working 60, 70 hours a week, but like it did not feel that way in terms of like a exhaustion or overwork standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. There is like this big difference when I look back at periods of my life when I was, working really hard, but not mindfully. And I didn't have these like mind body tools kind of integrated into my system. I can see that I was kind of at that burnout and I would dread going back into work the next morning. Kind of, you're talking about having this like vitality when you wake up in the morning. I would wake up with the
Yeah.
opposite. It was like my feet would drag. And having the mind body tools, and it really is a deep reflection process. Like so much of flow state training and so much of what I do with clients and what I teach people is so much of just tapping into your own wisdom and listening to your own self and checking in with yourself and kind of picking up on those cues. Like you said, it's hard in the moment sometimes, but if you're regularly starting this practice of just noticing what's happening in your body and what energy you're getting or starting your day with or getting from the activities that you're partaking in, just having that record, that mental note of what's happening in your body and where you're at can change everything for you. And flow state, like you said, will not make you feel like your feet are dragging in the morning. It will make you jump out of bed and be like, how can I keep going?
Yeah, just noticing. I really like that phrase. I thought that was good. Justine, if people want to learn more about flow, if they want to connect with you, maybe even explore some of the offerings that you have out there, where can people do that?
Yeah, they can visit us at www.theflowcodes.com or on social at theflowcodes.
Awesome. Justine, my final question for you. If you had the opportunity to teach a 16-week class to a group of graduating college seniors on a topic that isn't normally covered in the classroom, what would you teach and how would you teach it?
I knew this question was coming because I've heard it on your podcast before. And, if you had asked me this question like weeks before or before this conversation, I probably would have said I would teach a course on flow state because I do feel that this is just such potent information and can be so powerful. And I do see it being such a part of our future in the workplace and just in the world. But right now, I'm actually, funnily enough, feeling a different answer because we just kind of came out of this conversation of mind, body, and noticing. And I especially feel like in that time as a graduating senior coming out of college, you have so many questions about where you're going in the world. And there's so many different pressures, expectations from peers, from family, from teachers, from jobs. And you're kind of facing this like first part of life where your decisions are really going to start to impact like what life is going to be for you. And that is a lot of pressure. And I think I look back on my journey and when I came out of college, I did not know the answers, and I had no idea who to listen to or what to do. And the only thing I really kind of came to was I was just going to keep listening to myself and my gut feeling. And I know that a lot of us don't necessarily know how to hear that sometimes. And even through my life, even having listened to my gut a lot, I still have found myself not listening to it sometimes, not listening to those body cues. For example, even in the last couple of years, I've had like job opportunities come up that I'm kind of going through the process, almost going through the motions of like getting the job. But I'm having this like deep guttural feeling that's like telling me this is a no. And I keep kind of just going on autopilot because it's what's expected or because I feel like I've maybe already kind of committed by just opening the door. And I think that having those mind-body tools and really learning how to tap into your own inner wisdom and recognize what your body is telling you, what your mind is telling you, and kind of being able to really read that in yourself is really important at that age and really important at that stage of life, because having that will be able to direct you better than any other advice or podcast or book or person can, because that's when you're leading from the heart, and that's when you're really listening to yourself and living the most authentically. So I think that is probably what I would teach my course on, is just learning how to tap into that mind body wisdom.
Can I take that course now?
Yeah.
That's such a good one, honestly. It would have saved me many of years and decisions throughout my 20s that I almost wish I had back sometimes. But I know it's all part of the process. Like, you have to not trust yourself and to make a decision that is kind of against your gut, see it through, and then realize and start building some confidence that hey, my body, my mind was telling me this was not the right answer. I should have followed through with it. So whenever that feeling starts to come through again on another subsequent decision, I had this feeling before, and I should probably listen in a little bit more. And it doesn't have to necessarily being that it's an immediate no, but it could be tapping into yourself a little bit more, maybe reflecting with a friend and seeing what a friend is picking up from your verbal cues, from your energy, things like that. I just think it'd be so important to learn that at that age, because it probably would save you a little bit of that learning process.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, even in the last couple of years, I found myself almost on autopilot sometimes, going through these motions, and then I'm like, wait a minute, everything in my body and mind is telling me I don't want to do this. Why am I doing this? And then it's a really easy no. I've kind of started to live by this motto of, it's an absolute yes or it's a no. If I don't feel like it's an absolute yes, then I've got to walk away from that. That's my heart and my gut telling me that this is not the direction for me. And like you said, I think it would save so much time, and it would just help point you in such a better direction if you had those tools to learn how to do that with a little bit more accuracy when you're coming at that stage of life.
Definitely. Everybody, this is my friend Justine from the Flow Codes. Justine, always a pleasure chatting with you. This was a great conversation. I really loved learning about this topic. I'm excited to continue to see what you do in this space.
Thanks so much for having me, Justin. I just love that we got to chat, and I love supporting The Struggle is Real. And thank you so much for having me today. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for listening to the episode. As always, I appreciate your kind words. If you want to leave us a rating and review on your podcast player right now, that would absolutely make my day. If you want to find episode show notes, our blog, and other great resources, head over to tsirpodcast.com. If you have follow-up questions, an idea for a future episode, or just want to say hi, we have a contact form on our website, and those messages go straight into my inbox, and I promise you, I will reply. But all right, guys, I really appreciate you tuning in. I love you all, and you're not alone. Let's keep making it through our struggles together.
Mm-hmm.